And beginning with verse number 43. Jesus says here, "Ye have heard that it hath been said, Thou shalt love thy neighbor, and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the publicans the same? And if you salute your brethren only, what do you more than others? Do not even the publicans so? Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." Heavenly Father, I thank you for the opportunity to meet together tonight in your name, Lord. I just pray that you'll bless our time together. Bless the preaching and teaching of your word tonight, Lord. I just pray that the lesson will go out as you want it to go out. Lord, I pray that you empty me of self and fill me with your Holy Spirit. I pray that you'll deal with our hearts now. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. As I've been saying to you, we're studying Matthew, and Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 are all one sermon, a sermon of Jesus. We call it the Sermon on the Mount because he went up onto a mountainside and began to preach and teach. And so all three of these chapters are all just one sermon. And in chapter 5, we've been looking at 7 times that he says, "But I say unto you." Notice that in verse 44. It's the 7th one. It's the final one in this chapter. He says, "But I say unto you." And so he's basically taking on the status quo. He's taking on the culture of his day. He's taking it on, and he's challenging it. And he's basically, the things that people think are okay in his day, he's going, hold on, you're completely missing the point. You haven't even begun to scratch the surface of what it is to be godly. There were people who thought that they were good. There were people who thought that they were good enough, maybe to go to heaven. There were people who thought that they had been good people all their lives. There were people who thought that they were pleasing to God just because they'd never killed anybody, or they had never committed adultery, or they had never done this, or they had never done that. They thought because there were actions they had not done, then they were good. And Jesus is going through here and he's basically going, hold on, you've totally missed the boat. Because if you've ever looked in lust, if you've ever hated your brother without a cause, if you've ever gotten mad, if you've ever got angry and stepped off into some serious bouts of anger, well, you're as guilty of as any murderer. And he's going into these things. And I want to back up, the message that I brought last Sunday night. Look at verse 38. "Ye have heard that it has been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man will sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain, go with him 2 miles. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away." And I tend to be of the persuasion on these verses that we try to apply these truths as much as possible. I tried to explain, you've also got to be pretty practical in how you can't lend to everybody that walks up and asks you to borrow from you. I mean, it's just kind of difficult to do that. You can't tell bankers to do that. I mean, they'd go out of business. They would lend to wrong people. They would lend too much money. They can't do that. So I was trying to give you more of a practical approach. But I want to say this: as much as you can apply that to your life, you should. As much as you can. And honestly, we as Christians ought to be trying to grow in that area and trying to apply this even more. We're trying to grow in love. We're trying to grow in grace. We're trying to grow in our application of the Word of God. And so, yeah, we should be trying to do this. Every time somebody every time somebody asks me to go a mile with them, I ought to try to go 2 with them. Sometimes that's a little difficult. Sometimes I'm busy that day. Sometimes I'm on the clock and I owe an employer or something of that nature. Sometimes it's going to be difficult to apply. But again, we should try to apply it as much as possible. That being said, the reason I'm saying that is because I want you to understand these next verses that we're looking at tonight, verses 43 through 48, we should try to apply these as much as possible. This is probably the biggest challenge thus far that he puts forth. Where he says, in verse 43, "Ye have heard that it hath been said, Thou shalt love thy neighbor, and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies. Bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you. Pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust." That's really hard to do. That's the hardest thing, I believe, so far in this sermon that's to apply. To love your enemy. I want to pause right there and say to you tonight, a lot of times we think we have enemies. I want to say to you that sometimes we have perceived enemies that aren't actually our enemies. Sometimes we think ill of people, or we think that someone's our enemy when really they're not. If you want an example of this, the Jews they felt like the Samaritans were their enemy. And Jesus, when a Jew asked him, "Who's my neighbor?" What did they teach? They taught love your neighbor. And Jesus said, and the Jew asked him, "Well, who's my neighbor?" And that's when Jesus told him the story of the Good Samaritan. And by the end of the story, the Jew can't even bring himself to say the Samaritan. He just says, "Well, the man that helped him." He just so happens to be a Samaritan. A lot of times we think someone's our enemy. Listen, in our world today, sometimes we think that someone's our enemy based on their skin color or based on their status. Sometimes we think that someone's our enemy because maybe they have a larger bank account than we do. Maybe they just worked harder for it. Maybe that doesn't make them our enemy. Sometimes we tend to think that someone's our enemy when really they're not. We've got to be careful of that. So all I'm trying to say is, starting off this, have some discernment on who your real enemies are. Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Be aware of who your genuine, true enemies are. When it comes to the political arena, when it comes to in the workplace, wherever, your real enemy isn't usually going to be obvious. It's usually going to be a wolf, and he's usually going to have sheep's clothing on. Okay? And he talks about that in Matthew chapter 7. Your real enemies tend to not be who you think they are. And so, some of the... I'll give you something that maybe everybody can kind of relate to. Take for example the story of Star Wars. My kids will like that. What makes it I guess, I don't know if you'd say appealing or what makes it so intriguing, that might be a good word, is the bad guy. Like the first 3 movies, you've seen it, Darth Vader, he's got the black helmet and all this. The bad guy is actually his dad. It actually turns out, if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert, it actually turns out to be the hero's dad. It's not at all who he thought it was. And then, if you find out the backstory of how that guy became Darth Vader, you find out he befriended a guy he should have never befriended. The Emperor. The Emperor turns out to be the darkest character in the whole story. He appears to be this nice guy, and he's really sweet to everybody. He winds up, you see what I'm saying? So all I'm trying to say is have some perception on who your enemies are. Pay attention to what they're really saying. Try to read between the lines if you can. Have some discernment. I tell people all the time, when politicians are saying something, try to read between the lines. You're not just listening to what they're saying. You're also listening to what they're not saying. You're listening to what their enemies are saying. You're listening to what and you've got to listen to all kinds of sources. Use some perception. Have some discernment on who your actual enemies are. And that's another thing. I didn't have this in my notes, but that's another thought that Paul was bringing out in Ephesians chapter 6, where he was saying, you're not actually wrestling with flesh and blood. Yeah, there are flesh and blood enemies out there. There really are. There are enemies that all of us could probably point to and say, that person did me wrong. That person did me harm. Yes, but if you really want to know what's going on, you have to understand the spiritual stuff that's going on behind the scenes. And that's what Paul was telling them in Ephesians chapter 6. You're wrestling not with flesh and blood. You're wrestling with demons. There's actual demonic activity going on that's attacking you or using that person to get you. You think it's just that person. Really, it's much more than that. There's actually quite a bit going on behind the scenes. And so, when Jesus is telling us to love our enemies, you got to realize here, he sees the whole picture. And he realizes it's not just that person that's coming at you. It's everything that's going on behind the scenes. Jesus could see all of that. He sees all of the demonic warfare that's going on behind the scenes. He sees all the angels battling. So if I could just we've got to use some perception on who our actual enemies are. When we recognize who our actual enemies are, that's one step. Just figuring out who they are. The next step is you got to love them. Oh, that's difficult. You have heard that it hath been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies. We are called to love even our own enemies. Boy, who's our enemies? I don't know. How do you define that? Would you say national enemies? See, I grew up studying history. I've told you that before. And part of the history that I've studied was World War II. As a kid, I hated Germans. I really did. I hated German people. Hated them. Hated them. I didn't even know any of them. But I hated them. I'm talking about like as a 7-year-old kid. I knew they were the bad guys. And then I started figuring, hold on, no, actually the Nazis were the bad guys. And Nazis were everywhere. They weren't just Germans. They were in Spain. They were in South America. There were Nazis in Russia. There were Nazis in the U.S. Oh, I didn't know all that. It's not just Germans. Oh. Just so happens there were some German people who were fooled into believing that guy's lies. And again, I just touched on this. What do you think was going on behind the scenes? Oh, I think the devil was playing around with people. I really do. I think the devil and his demons had a heyday with that stuff. I don't hate German people. I think there was a time in their history where they made some bad choices and elected a bad leader and followed him. That doesn't make me hate them. I hate Nazism. It's an ideology to hate. It is. I don't like it. It's anti-Bible. It's anti-loving your neighbor. It teaches you need to kill whole people who don't look like you, or kill whole people that don't think like you. Now, there's nothing about loving your neighbor or loving your enemy in that. So, I hate Nazism. Hate it. I don't hate Germans. I don't. If I did enough digging, I might even find out I might be part German. I know my last name is Irish, has Irish roots. When the kids were younger, Keithan liked studying history and stuff, and Theron did too. And so we would watch Liberty's Kids, and Liberty's Kids is just this. Basically it's like 40 episodes, and they travel around with like Benjamin Franklin, and they travel around with all these George Washington, and all these heroes of the Revolution, and all that. And so my kids, by the end of it, they're like, "So we're supposed to hate British people?" I think y'all missed the point. And then when they see some of my World War II literature where we're fighting alongside the Brits, they're like, I thought they were the bad guys. Yeah, 200 years before. Keep up. No, they're not bad just because they're British. Okay, they're not bad just because of their nationality. They can be bad because of maybe their views. They can have bad views. They can have bad ways of thinking. So when you think about enemies, what is an enemy? When you think about national enemies, in the Revolutionary War, their national enemy was the Brits. Just a few years later, you'll find them hobnobbing in London. The very guys who fought a war with them were visiting London and spending time there, having a good time, going to parties. What's an actual enemy? If you're talking about enemies to Christians, well, the first one that pops up, first one that pops into my head, Muslims. It's the first one because it's two religions going at each other. Boy, I remember seeing 9/11. I was a sophomore in high school when that happened, and 9/11 happened, and the planes hit the Twin Towers. And man, I remember just school was different that day. Everybody was just quiet. Nobody was joking. Nobody was talking. It was just a very serious day. And they sent us home early. Some teachers were crying. I remember that. I didn't understand it all. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't like it. I knew this, man, I hate Muslims. I hate them. That was my feeling. That's what I thought. That's how I felt. Then I began to grow in my understanding of the Lord. I began to grow in my understanding of Christianity. And I'm not one of these Christians that's so enlightened that I think Islam is a way to heaven. It's not. Okay? There's lots of people that are trying to merge Christianity and Islam, and they call it Chrislam, and I'm not with that. No. Right. No. Jesus is the key to heaven, and Islam doesn't recognize that, so I can't agree with them on their religious beliefs. I never will. Right. I hate that they are caught up in a false teaching. I hate that fact. I really hate that. I hate how powerful Islam has become. I hate that. But I do not hate the people. I've had to grow to the point where I do not hate the people. I don't. There's a guy that has a ministry in Philadelphia right now. His ministry mainly is just to Muslims. There's a large Muslim population in Philadelphia, and he started a church up there, and he's just going out. He spent 2 years in Egypt learning the culture, learning about the Muslim faith, learning about people, just so he could try to reach them for Christ. Man, I love stuff like that. You say, why, Brother Joe? Because I don't hate the people. I want them reached. I want them reached for Christ. We have some missionaries that will remain nameless that are in a country right now that's 98% Muslim. Well, you couldn't be in a better spot. Everybody around you is lost. Everyone I meet around me, when I say, hey, are you saved? Yes, sir, I've been saved since I was 2. Hope so. Sure hope so. But I don't hate Muslims. I do hate that they're caught up in a lie. I believe they're caught up in a lie. But I don't hate them. I don't. I've had to grow to that. I used to hate them. I used to hate them pretty hard. When I was younger, I hated anybody I hated any team that wasn't the Steelers. Start talking about football. I did. Man, I hated Cowboy fans. My pastor, from the time I was 7 to the time I was 27, was a Cowboy fan, and I loved him. I think he helped me love my enemies. I think he helped me get past that, because I hated Cowboy fans. Hated them. I don't know. I've just kind of got to the point, it's just a game. Who cares? But I had to grow to that. I had to grow to that, especially as a kid. I took that stuff really seriously. Don't talk about my Steelers. I don't know, you just have to mature past that. You have to get past it. It's just a game. It's really trivial. I like to rib people. I like to give Brother Mark a hard time here. You know, he's a Cowboy fan. I love to give him a hard time. Actually, I don't mind the Cowboys so much. I kind of want them to win just so the Steelers can beat them, and it feels so much better. Just saying. We are, who is our enemies? I'm telling you, there's lots of people in the world that we could label our enemies. Lots of them. And we are called, as Christians, not to hate them. Love your enemies. What does that begin to look like when you love your enemies? Well, he describes it. Bless them that curse you. That's kind of hard. When someone curses at you, it's a little hard to go, God bless you, in response. It's a little difficult, isn't it? Most of us, at best, we just go, stand that? And we drive on, you know. Or we walk on, whatever. We're supposed to bless them that curse us. We're to do good to them that hate us. That can be pretty difficult sometimes. Somebody hates us and we're to do good to them. We are to pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Have you been used? Have you been persecuted? Well, Jesus challenges us as Christians to pray for that person or to pray for those people. It's quite a challenge. I tell you, you're going to have a hard time convincing me that genuine Christianity, these truths that I'm bringing out tonight, have been around for 2,000 years, okay? And I understand Christianity, everything that's called itself Christianity for the past 2,000 years, has not behaved itself like this, okay? I understand that. But you cannot tell me that this is a violent religion. You cannot tell me that this is that Christians are, you know, that Christ is oppressive, that everywhere Christ has went, it's been terrible. No, no, no. He brings love everywhere he goes. His people may have a hard time implementing it sometimes, but he brings love. Deep and challenging love. Not the shallow forms of love that we tend to think of. Jesus challenges us to love like no one's ever loved. Brennan challenges us to love like no one else has ever loved. Verse 45, he goes on, he says, that you may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. In other words, this is what shows that you are the children of God, when you love your enemies. Y'all are studying in Acts right now in Sunday school. What chapter are y'all in? Brother Mark, what chapter? 10. So y'all have already passed where Stephen was stoned in chapter 7. What does he do when they're stoning him to death? He prays for them. I have to say, he took this truth and he implemented it pretty good, didn't he? People who were killing him, in the act of killing him, slowly prayed for them. Which is exactly what Jesus did on the cross. Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Human beings don't love like this naturally. We don't. We need God to love like this. We need Him in our life. We need Him to love through us. He goes on, it says, for He maketh His sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. Do you ever struggle with that? I know I do. I know people who do, who have told me this. Brother Joe, why, if these people are so sinful, if these people are doing so wrong in their life, why does it seem like they're succeeding? Well, because the sun shines on the evil and on the good. And it rains on the just and on the unjust. But if you have Christ, understand this, at the end of our lives, It's not going to matter how much sunshine and rain that lost person had in their life. If they don't have Christ, they don't have nothing. I've heard it put like this too. Lost people, this may be the only heaven they ever know. Hopefully they get saved before it's too late, but this may be the only heaven they ever experience. And here we Christians who are headed for heaven, we're complaining that they have it good. We're caught up in envy and covetousness is what we're caught up in, which the Bible warns us against. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. And then he explains it further. He says in verse 46, For if ye love them which love you, what reward have ye? If ye love them which love you, what reward have ye? I have found it is a lot easier to love people who love you already. It's easy, isn't it? It's not even difficult. Brennan, come up here, front. It's not even difficult to love people who love you. It's honestly, you can put it on cruise control. You already feel that way. There's no challenge to it. You don't have to make a decision to do that. You already do. Do not even the publicans the same? And if ye salute your brethren only, what do ye more than others? Do not even the publicans so? If you say hello or shake hands with just the people that that love you or that you get along with or the group that you fit into, don't everybody else do that? Here's the challenge in verse 48. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. And that word perfect there means complete or matured. This is the sign of a mature Christian, when they even love their enemies. I don't know about you, but I feel pretty challenged. Listen, we as Christians are challenged to mature. We are challenged to grow up. And it's a decision that we make. We don't just grow up on cruise control. We are challenged to. Say, Brother Joe, how can I grow as a Christian? You want me to summarize? Learn to love your enemy. Decide to, and then cultivate it and work on it. Ask the Lord to help you with it. You say, how do I do it? Well, first of all, you decide to. And you say, Lord, this is really hard. Loving my enemy. Can you help me with this? I'm a Steeler fan. Lord, it's really hard to love Baltimore Raven fans. It's really hard. Y'all need to pray for my brother Ben. He's a Miami Dolphin fan. He has hated the Patriots for the past 20 years. He hates the Bills. Brother Sonny, when the Bills were good, he was like Jim Kelly. Oh, guy. Hate Jim Kelly. I can remember you saying that when we were kids. I remember you saying, I hate Jim. Hey Ben, Jim Kelly was really good. I hate Jim Kelly. You probably don't even remember that. But anyways, y'all need to pray for my brother. We're challenged to mature. We're challenged to grow. And the ultimate sign of that and the ultimate challenge of that is to love your enemies. This is why Jesus said, and he was quoting Deuteronomy when he said, you can summarize the law in this. Love God with everything that you are, and love thy neighbor as thyself. And he defined our neighbor as even our enemy. That's how, okay, you want me to prove to everyone that they are sinners? That they have not kept the law? You have not loved God with everything that you are, and you have not loved your neighbor as yourself. As Christians, that's what we're trying to do. Oh, we fall short all the time. Who doesn't? But I want to love God with everything that I am. Only He can help me do that. See how helpless we are? I need God to work through me just so that I can serve God. This is why when people are telling me how good they are, or they're counting on their works to go to heaven, hold on. You can't even do good works without God. He's got to do them through you. Your good works are blemished. They're going to have some sort of motive that isn't right. And they get into that in chapter 6, our motives for serving. You're going to have some sort of motive that isn't even right for why you served God. All of our works are blemished. That's why we need the Lord to live through us. Be therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. As Christians, we are challenged to love our neighbor and love our enemy. And I tell you, it's quite a challenge. We need to ask the Lord to help us with this. I want to give everyone a moment, every head bowed, every eye closed, to do just that tonight. I want you to do some business